ignore the fact that I did not finish making my bed this morning. I have no excuse. I just forgot. But speaking of not finishing tasks, that is what I want to talk about today. If you liked that amazing transition that I just did there, my name's Robin. I'm on a lot of platforms under the Eclectus. But onwards with the transitioned topic. DNF, did not finish, is a term you see a lot on online spaces when talking about books. You see it in reviews. I loaded many Goodreads reviews that have 2 or 1 stars that said DNF 80%, DNF 70%. I got to a certain point in the book, but I did not finish. And this is an understandable thing. I think we've all been there at least once. We've started a book, and for one reason or another, that book lost our attention. Either something came up and we accidentally stopped reading, and by the time we would start again, we kind of lost our space, or maybe we intentionally did it. Maybe the book was bad, or maybe the book was troubling, or maybe for one reason or another, we actively put that book down and did not want to continue. But is it a good thing to DNF? Is it a bad thing? Is it a bad thing to DNF? Now, I think the answer, as many things do, lie in between these two extremes. I think, and this is all subjective, of course, the use of DNF as a tool is good when done sparingly. However, when overly relied upon, it becomes a crutch that makes us worse readers. Now, what do I mean by that? Let's talk about books real quick. You know, I'm sure you all know what a book is, but books are a bit different than most kinds of consumed media for many reasons, of course. But in this discussion, the two things I want to bring up are A, books require a lot more energy to consume than a lot of pieces of media. When we talk about music, when we talk about movies, when we talk about television shows, these things can all be pretty passively consumed. You can turn your brain off and watch a movie. You don't have to, and in fact, you typically get a better experience when you're actively consuming these things, but you don't have to. And also, the second point, books are typically, for most people, a larger time commitment than movies, TV, music, yada, yada, yada. And for me especially, I am a very slow reader. I probably average about 12 to 15 books a year, which to you might sound like a lot, and to me sounds like a lot, but then the people I'm friends with on Goodreads make that look like child's play. So, but either way, most people don't finish a novel in 2 hours, and if you do finish a novel in 2 hours, all the power to you. I don't think you actually read it, I think you skimmed it. Now, for me, let's say the average book takes about 2 or 3 weeks to complete. That's a lot longer than 2 or 3 hours, or 2 or 3 minutes for a song or something, you know. Because of that, you could be using that time, again, because you're actively using that time. You can't be reading 2 books at the same time, physically, side by side. That's just a fact. I mean, unless I guess you can try that with audiobooks, but I think that's just gonna give you a headache. Why would you actively continue reading something that you are not enjoying during that time when you could save yourself the effort and spend that time reading something you would like? I actually think there's reasons. Now, first, I said it's a tool that should be used sparingly. That does imply it should be used, and it should be used, in my opinion, in my humblest opinion. For example, if you are reading a book, and you are unaware that it contains material that you find mentally distressing or unenjoyable in its nature, that to a point that it mentally troubles you, depictions of certain forms of violence or crimes, or you get the gist of it, you should put that down. You shouldn't engage with stuff that mentally troubles you for your own enjoyment, I don't think, you know? And if you come across this unexpected content depicted in a certain way, you shouldn't continue. I personally, I think you should use your free will to put that book down and pick something up that does not trigger that response in you. But many people DNF books just because they are bored of the book because the book is bad. And I think that is not an ideal behavior to exercise, especially one to exercise liberally. Because I personally think we owe it to ourselves as readers to consume crappy books every once in a while. I really do. Now, I don't mean we need to go out and actively find a book that we think is going to be bad and read it. However, the fact of the matter is, there's a lot of books out there. And a lot of books out there are not good, you know? And of course, not good is subjective. And I've many a book I like that people around me don't like, and vice versa. But that's interesting because that is not an objective thing. That is a subjective thing. And we as readers, I feel, are made better readers by thoroughly consuming media we don't like, thoroughly reading books that we don't like. Why is that? Why would that be? I think the answer to that is simple. When you read something that is bad, it forces you to figure out why that's bad. Especially if it's something that you thought was going to be good. You're like, well, shoot, this is in my wheelhouse. This should be something I like, but I don't like it. Why? And it gets you thinking, because I personally think it is much easier to vocalize what you like about a book, what you like about a movie, what you like about something, than what you don't like about it. At least it's harder to do it in a way that is critical. Which in my last video, I talked a bit about critical analysis of books in the book talk setting. But in this case, when you are actively having to think about what you don't like about a book, and forcing yourself to go through a book, even though it might not be the best, you come out of that experience more educated on your own tastes and also other people's tastes. Because there are plenty of things in books that one person may not like that might be exactly what someone else is looking for in a book. For example, a little personal anecdote for me. I was reading the second Legends and Lattes book, Bookshops and Bone Dust, which is a book. I did not dislike this book, but I did not find it to be as strong of an entry as the original. And I was talking to a friend of mine about it, and it was shortly after I finished it, and I said, I'd give that book probably a 3 out of 5 stars. I think that it did a lot of what the original did well. However, it didn't add anything new to it. And some of the things it added, I personally wasn't a big fan of. Because this book, and this is some spoilers for Bookshops and Bone Dust, which you should read it if you haven't, but read Legends and Lattes first, in my opinion. However, you're free to interact with the world however you want to. If you don't want to do that, all the power to you. And there's a certain plot in there where the main character has a doomed romance. Because we know in the original book, because this book is a prequel, that she ends up with someone in that book. And in the prequel, we find out that we see her go through a romance, which we obviously know is not meant to last, because we know she ends up with someone else in the original book that takes place afterwards. And I was talking to my friend, and I said, I think that makes why would you add romance to a prequel? I don't think that could ever really make any sense to me. To which she said that was one of my favorite parts of that book. And I was a bit confused. I'm like, why would you like it if you knew it didn't work? To which she said, it's the suspense. It's the suspense of not knowing how it's going to end. Because you know it's not going to work out, obviously. But you don't know if it's going to end messily, if it's going to end in a tight and neat fashion. And this can tell us a lot about the protagonist and how they go about their relationships. Going through a successful relationship arc tells us some things about a character, but how they handle going through a failed relationship tells us a lot of other things about that character. And that really stuck with me. I actually reread the book after that with that frame of mind, and I kind of enjoyed it a bit more. Still not as much as the original, of course. But I still, even though I enjoyed it a bit more, under that lens, wouldn't really say it's something I enjoyed as much as other things I've enjoyed. I much rather enjoyed the completed romance arc in the original book as opposed to the failed one in the prequel. But that did make me think, well, why do I not like this when other people do? And that is something I would never have reached if I did not finish the book. You know, I would have just been left confused and unable to critically assess my thoughts on it. The fact of the matter is, there's a lot of bad books out there. But bad books tell us why we enjoy good books. And they also tell us what parts of the literary sphere, what tropes, what character archetypes we do and don't like in our fiction. And this is specifically talking, I do read nonfiction. I'm mostly looking at this from a fiction lens, which I do think there's merit to reading good and bad nonfiction books. I do read plenty of nonfiction, but I typically lean a bit more into fiction, into fantasy, into sci-fi. So far what I've pretty much been trying to argue is that if we do not finish books that we find just to be bad, we are robbing ourselves of being able to properly critically analyze them. And in many cases, things we may not like about a book we have not finished do get resolved or twisted in a way that we actually may enjoy, and that there may have been some intentionality behind that. Not always, though. There have been many books that I have read and I'm like, oh, this really stinks now, but I'm sure they'll wrap it up, and they did. That is also true. That is a thing that unfortunately does happen. But I think that we should owe it to ourselves to resolve that and to give ourselves the closure of finishing that book. So when we go to analyze it, whether we're writing a review, or just journaling about it, we can approach that as educated as possible. And maybe you'll still hate it, but be educated. Be an educated hater. If you truly hate a book, I think you owe it to yourself to finish that book so you can hate on it properly. But yeah, there are, I think, recapping what I said earlier too, there are instances where I think we should put books down if they are causing us mental anguish. And even though there is a sink of time into a bad book, if the book is merely bad and does not cause us any mental stress, we are still spending our time in a way that is productive to us as readers, that will, down the line, help us appreciate other works of fiction more, or other pieces of written media, fiction or nonfiction, even more. But I do want to know what you think. Do you think that we should DNF books more or less frequently than we as a community do? What merits a DNF, or what merits pushing through? This is all subjective, of course, but I am kind of curious to see what other people think on that. So hop on down to the comment section below and tell me, what do you think? When is it? Are there benefits to reading bad books? What are those benefits? Did I miss something? Did I say something wrong and you don't agree with a point that I made? It's really up to you. With that being said, my name is Robin, also known under the moniker of the Eclectus, which a lot of people get that. I hear Eclectus, Eclectus. It's Eclectus, like the bird, the Eclectus parrot. That was me. That was my spiel. Peace on out.